Welcome back to another video. For this one I thought I'd take a load of archive footage and do a fresh edit to create one big SurfSkate 101 video. We start off with a basic overview of the SurfSkate, including tips for improving your stance and your turns. And then we take the SurfSkate into various different bits of terrain, such as the pump track and also the bowl. There's also a section devoted to experimenting with the SurfSkate setup, so different types of trucks and combining those with different types of decks. And we finish off with a trip to an original 1970s skate bowl, which turned out to be the perfect SurfSkate terrain. Let me know if you like this longer format type of video in the comments below, and also if you're new to the channel, feel free to hit subscribe. Anyway, enough of my yakking, let's get into it. The model I'm riding here is the Carver Triton. It's got a fairly standard looking skateboard deck, perhaps a little wider than usual, lovely concave. There's a few surfy features from an aesthetic point of view, such as this grip tape design, and also a stringer on the bottom. Also a bit of a surfboard nose, but nothing really that will change the performance of the board. And to be honest, any skateboard deck would work for a carve-in surf skateboard. The thing that's really making a difference in the performance here are the trucks and the wheels. And the first thing that struck me is the height of these trucks. Oh my gosh. When you stand on the board, it definitely feels like you're higher up. And this has a couple of key advantages. Number one, you can get more purchase for your calves, really lean the board over. And number two, you're less likely to get wheel bite when you do lean the board right over for tight surfing calves. This front truck is designed to be really loose, and you can see the orientation is back to front from a normal truck. This is orientated so you get a super fast turn, and this board will pretty much turn within its wheelbase. And also the back is designed to feel like a surfboard carving. In terms of dimensions, we can compare it to my regular skateboard, and you can see straight away, oh my gosh, those trucks are a lot higher up. Also, the wheelbase is longer. This wheelbase truck to truck is 20 inches. On my Andy Anderson truck to truck, it's 18 inches. So there's another 2 inches to really get that nice surf stance happening. As you can see, board-wise, they're pretty much the same length and pretty much the same width, just a little bit less in the tail. But to be honest, as long as you've got a kick tail and a bit of width and a nice wide wheelbase, it will work a treat for a surf skate. Another key feature are the wheels. These bad boys are 70mm with a 78A compound, so nice and soft, really great for getting lots of speed on rough terrain. Compare them to my 55mm wheels, and you can see there's quite a lot of difference. The first thing I wanted to sort out was my stance. So after a bit of experimentation, I found that placing the front foot just behind the bolts with the ball of the foot pretty much on the center line gave me some good purchase on the front leg, and placing the back foot in the pocket of the tail but with the ball of the foot again on the tail with the heel coming over the side a little bit gave me some really good leverage for carving and pumping. Having the ball of the foot on the center line meant that I could engage my ankle as well, so there was even more flexibility for pumping and carving. If I left it on there flat, I sort of lose some of the mobility of that ankle and some of the ability to really drive out of the calves and out of the pumps. The next thing I noticed was a little bit of a SurfSkate idiosyncrasy due to these super loose trucks and the height and the ability to drive and carve. It's totally possible to increase your speed with all four wheels still on the deck by pumping and carving the board. Do a little tiny tight carve using your body weight and swiveling around the hips, and you can actually snake the board along and create more speed than you started with. This eliminates the need for tic-tacking and getting the wheels off of the deck as you would with a normal skateboard with tighter trucks. And I found this to be a real joy. Once you kicked off, you didn't have to kick off again or tic-tac. There were two techniques I worked on to get the snaky carvy pump a little bit more efficient. The first one, probably the easiest, is what I'm calling the backside turn. So you're sighted as to where you're going, swishing the hips through, keeping the head in the centre of the turn. The more you bend the knees, the better it is, and push the board around the turn using your shoulders and your hips to add the speed. If that's then combined with the second part, a front side turn, so that one is a little bit trickier because you're unsighted into the turn, you're turning back on yourself. I found with that one, again, head and shoulder, looking to where you want to go, and then swish your hips and your knees through. Again, bending the knees really helps. As soon as you've done that, then it's time again for a backside, and then a front side, and then a backside. All the time, your body is doing a snaky motion, and you can get it really efficient so that you don't really feel you're doing an awful lot of work and the board is still accelerating away. The next thing I wanted to try out was a bit of barefoot skating. I thought that would really give me that surfing feel, the way that riding a surfboard on the ocean barefoot would. Loads of board contact, loads of board feel. As usual, I quickly got carried away, started experimenting with grinding the trucks across the coping, no real bail available. Woohoo! Also got fixated with taking the SurfSkate into the deep bowl, these loose trucks over that waterfall. Woohoo! Keep the knees bent. I was wanting to see how close I could get to the coping, and I had to stop myself because it was all getting a bit silly. Now, I find the pump track to be really good fun. It's a great way to isolate learning to carve and also learning to pump, and you don't need to necessarily be able to drop in to start working on those things. I found a barrier to entry to getting into bowls and also learning transition to start with was I couldn't drop in, and therefore I couldn't develop enough speed to have a good crack at doing those skills. I also find the pump track a really fun way to exercise. Gets the old heart rate up, gets the lactic acid going in the legs and also the glutes. The novelty of doing squats in the gym and spin classes is worn pretty thin. So the pump track is a great way to push through my physical barriers. I can harness some of that adrenaline and I don't really notice the burn and the pain. I found when I started to learn the pump track, there were three main skills I needed to develop. The first one was rolling in. The second one was pumping over a speed bump. And the third one was carving a turn around the burn. To start with, I found rolling in a little bit scary, and it's a bit of a game of opposites. I think a conservative approach of starting on the edge and trying to go in is way more scary than approaching the roll-in with a little bit of speed. To start with, it was best to have a long run up to the roll-in. This allowed me to get my feet into the correct position, also get my knees bent down, and then as I rolled over the top, just tried to keep my weight centered and also just stay on the board. I also found that proximity could also be a little bit scary, so having a wider roll-in patch tended to be easier than trying to go down a little narrow roll-in nook. Once I'd rolled in, it was time to address the pump bump. Now the pump bumps are there to develop the speed, and that's where the pump track gets its name. So I found the technique for getting over a pump bump is to try and push my body weight up the first part of the bump whilst bending the knees up. And these act as sort of shock absorbers, trying to keep the head and the shoulders at the same level and just allowing the knees to bend up. When I get to the top of the bump, it's just a case of going down the other side and extending the legs back out. And it's the use of gravity and also that extending the legs that pushes the board forward like a bar of soap. And that's where the speed can be attained. Now there's a bit of a timing element with regards to when to pump. And I think I developed that through repetition and just a bit of trial and error. You probably noticed people steaming around a pump track and it looks like they're not really putting much work in and they're going like the clappers. And I think this is due to the advanced rider having the timing finessed so that there's relatively little amount of work that needs to be done to maintain and also increase the speed. I find the more courageous I can be with my knee bending, the more I can generate speed because I've got more to push through from. I also find that I change my foot pressures as I pump. So as I go up the speed bump, I put a little bit more pressure on the back foot and I bend the front knee up a little bit more. And as I come down the other side, I extend that front knee a little bit more and place a little bit more pressure on the front foot. The final skill to learn is to carve around a berm. And there's two different ways this can happen, front side and back side. So I relate this to surfing. A front side turn is where you've got the front of your body facing the transition or the wave. And a backside turn is where you've got the backside of your body facing the transition or the wave. Now it's sort of down to the individual as to which one you naturally find easier. I find with the front side, I can see the entire ramp, but it's a little bit more scary because I feel like I'm going to fall backwards. And with the backside, I find it easier to rotate the turn because I can see the transition. It's not quite as scary, but I can't see how far my wheels are going out. I remember the first type of carving turn that I learned was what I call a passive carving turn. So not really putting any pumping or swishing of the body in, just literally trying to turn around the corner and get out the other side. I found one thing that made this a lot easier was taking a racing driver style wide angle in, so trying to go as wide out of the turn as possible. And this allowed me to use the berm and not execute quite as tight a turn. And to start with, I found trying to carve a tight turn was quite tricky to do. One thing that helps with the carving is to bend the knees right down, and this is a common thing with skateboarding. I find it hard to bend my knees because it seems madness to get closer to the tarmac or the concrete. But I found through repetition I can train my brain that it is actually safer to go closer to the perceived danger. The more advanced style of carving turn is to actively try and pump through the corner. I found that I can place my body and my shoulders a little bit ahead of the turn, and this provides somewhere for me to then swish my legs around. And with a little bit of practice, it's possible to actually generate speed and pump through the corners and come out of the turn with more speed than you go into it with. I also found when practicing my carving, I could do things like make a little mark on the berm just to see how high I was getting up the berm. The higher I got up the berm, I found the more speed I could generate. On the berms on this pump track, there's a red line at the top, so I might try and aim to get my wheels to go over that red line. If it's a pump track with coping, you can also start to do a carving grind, so getting the trucks to swish across. I wouldn't recommend it on this pump track with the asphalt because that's pretty rough, and I reckon it'd end in the board stopping pretty quickly. When the pump track dries out, I'm going to get on my SurfSkate. I find generally with tarmac pump tracks that a softer wheel works better, takes a bit of the vibration out, and it also adds a little bit of speed and reduces a bit of the noise. I remember some of my early goals of a pump track was trying to get round a backside turn, trying to get round a front side turn, and then trying to link those things together and eventually make it through one lap of the pump track without doing any pushing off, trying to get back where I started, and then keeping on going round and round as many laps as I could. Obviously, one of the things that's going to hold you back is the burn of the legs. So building up your fitness, going for that world record of the amount of laps that are possible in one go. I also used to time myself around a lap and see if I could beat my world record time. Obviously, as my technique got better and better, it allowed me to pump more speed. I got more courageous through the berms and eventually got my time to reduce down. I think my goals for this session are to see if I can get my trucks up on the coping, bit of a carve grind maybe. Also want to experiment with trying to get a few stalls, maybe an axle stall. I think a 50-50 grind would be beyond my wildest dreams because the way these trucks are, I just think that front truck will buckle and that'll be the end of that. Anyway, enough of my yakking, let's get in there. First goal is the coping. I think I'll go for the coping in the shallow end with a little grind. Here we go. Whew. Whoa! That made a funny noise, and it was a front truck only, just a little snicker. It's like standing on the top of a slack line. It's just all over the shop. It really does make the strangest sound because the wheels are so soft they don't make any noise on the coping. And the trucks are a lot different to independent ones, so they just making a very strange sound when they hit the coping. I'm having that SurfSkate problem with just the front truck hitting the coping just due to the tight radius of the front truck turning, like a shopping trolley, and the back truck not quite getting on, so I need to just pump a little bit harder. Oh, that was a back truck that time. Okay, yeah, need to just pump it through. Okay, let's see if I can get a front side grind. Feels mental. Wow, that was better. Okay. That front truck just bends. The more I bend those knees, the more of a head of steam I get up. My watch is saying 155 BPM. Oh my goodness. Definitely beats going for a jog though. Little snick. Okay, this is the one. Oh, the world's worst axle stall. Oh, I hit the coping that time. Whoa, that was both trucks. Okay. Don't muff the axle. Oh, it was just slipping. I thought I'd chance my arm. And then that was that. It is wanting to grind. That was a really fun session. I started to get into the flow of the SurfSkate. It's definitely a lot different to normal skateboarding. I found I really needed to bend my knees up, and to get both trucks onto the coping and to do a convincing carve, I found I really had to do my surf turn of being active with my body as I swished through the turn, trying to keep the shoulders in line with the turn. Getting both trucks on the coping was pretty scary, and I started to get a few in the deep end, which was a lot of fun. Also managed to get that axle stall in the end, and the 50-50 grind worked surprisingly well, even though I couldn't find a way to make it look nice and stylish. My SurfSkate's a bit old now and it's looking a little bit tatty, so this session's inspired me to give it a little bit of TLC, maybe replace the grip tape and also fix up a few dings on those rails. Okay, I've been meaning to replace this grip tape for a while. Now I could use standard grip tape, but I was holding off on that because I do like the look of this grip tape with its sort of surfboard feel. Luckily, Carver make a direct replacement though, and they've sent this over to me. You can see it's got all the various bits one would need, including the logo. So I'm going to bang that on. To do that, I need to whip the trucks off. I'm going to use a hairdryer just to get this old grip tape nice and warm so I can pull it off. I thought while I was at it, I could also whip out one of these risers. That's something I've been meaning to do for a while. I don't think I need two risers on it. It's a bit overkill. And I thought I could also just service the trucks, pop a bit of speed cream in there and give it a general sort of once over, maybe sand the rails a little bit. So at the end, we'll end up with a nice fresh SurfSkate. Okay, managed to wrestle that deck grip off. It was pretty firmly on there, but with the help of the hairdryer, managed to warm the glue up and she came good eventually. Now I've had a bit of a sand around the rails and generally cleaned the board up, ready for the new deck grip to go on. It's left a bit of an indent where that old deck grip used to be, and I think that's pretty handy because it's going to help me pop this new deck grip into place. So I'm going to grab these bits. You can see it's sort of die cut, so it should look pretty nice. And I think this bit goes right there. So I'm going to pop these bits on. I'll see you on the other side. Well, there she blows. All finished and looking pretty splendid. I've also taken one riser out, so we're a bit closer to the ground. I wasn't convinced that I needed all of that crazy up in the airness. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully we won't get too much wheel bite. I can't wait to get back out there and give her a whirl. Now the Winkowski deck is starting to get a bit of a reputation in the SurfSkate community as a really nice SurfSkate deck. So I thought I'd give it a whirl, put those C5 trucks on, see how she feels. Fixing the trucks on is dead simple, it's just 4 bolts either side. Now these trucks do come with an 1/8 inch riser. I decided to bolt them straight onto the deck. I really like that direct feel, and I was also thinking about doing a few lip tricks, so I didn't want the board to be unnecessarily high. If you really want to go for safety and make sure you get no wheel bite, you should definitely put those risers in, but I was quite confident that with the shape of the Winkowski deck, I could get away with it. My main focus with this setup was to get in the pool and do a bit of grinding on that pool coping. So I took the liberty of grinding down the kingpin on the front truck. Now this comes supplied a little bit proud, and I really didn't want that digging in. Another thing that's worth noting is the reverse kingpin setup on the front truck puts the wheelbase back about 1/2 inch. Some people like to re-drill those front truck holes, put the truck forwards to make the wheelbase the same again. I didn't want to mess with my Dope Planet deck at this stage, and I also didn't want to change the pocket in the nose. There's not an awful lot of nose there anyway, and I was planning to do a little bit of backwards riding and a few fakey tricks. To complete the setup, I popped on some OJ Team Rider wheels. These are 61mm in diameter. They've got a 97A hardness, and I've always liked the way they scoot around on the concrete. Now the main selling point of these trucks is the way they turn, and I couldn't wait to get out there on the flatland and just get into a little bit of carving. You can achieve that SurfSkate phenomenon of not having to push off and just being able to pump through the turns on the flat and keep your momentum going. And I really enjoyed the feel of being able to carve in this fashion on what I consider to be a pretty regular skateboard deck. I tried out a few power slide turns. Those wheels broke out nicely, made a great sound on the concrete. And I also tried going around the tight pump track. The wheels on the tarmac, they were skittling along because they are pretty hard for tarmac. Now the biggest difference between the SurfSkate carving radius and regular trucks is the front truck turns way more, and that gives you a sort of elliptical carve where the back is more grippy and the front is more slidey. Next up, I was eager to get down to the skate park and try these trucks in the skate pool, and oh my goodness, with a little bit of practice, I found I could get some really tight turns, really pump through the shoulders, get that elliptical carving radius working for me. With the 60mm wheels as well, possible to get quite a lot of speed going, and I really enjoyed putting together a few carving lines. I found that when I started going for those double truck carving grinds, the elliptical turning radius of the surf trucks meant it was possible for the front truck to get on the coping and the back truck to stay below the coping. This sent me off willy-nilly into a sort of unintentional willy grind. I found the solution was to be really positive with my carving action. Actively swish the shoulders and the hips through, and that put the back truck up on the coping, and I managed to get a few double truck carving grinds. Next up, I was keen to see how these trucks felt riding backwards. So a little bit of rock to fakie action, and got bucked straight off on the first attempt. Now going backwards is the SurfSkate setup's Achilles heel. That front truck's like a shopping trolley, and when you go backwards, you've got that as the new back truck. So I found just resetting my front foot a little bit behind the bolts, this sort of accounted for that axle being backwards a bit, and also making sure my technique was really finessed, and I kept my knees bent, kept my centre of gravity low, and I managed to find that I could go back down the waterfall and execute a really remedial fakie carve. That felt really scary, and trying to pump back up the waterfall made the whole thing wobble off. I set my goal as trying to pump back up the waterfall and try and get back into a tail stall, and after a few attempts I managed to get a fakie carve, back round and then up into that tail stall. On regular indie trucks I really enjoy riding backwards, and I've managed to work my fakie carves up to fakie carve grinds in the pool. So it was a little bit disheartening to go back to feeling like a beginner at those fakie carves. It felt like with a bit more practice I would get used to that feel, but it definitely is a compromise with the carving feel being really nice, but the backwards feel being significantly harder. I thought I'd try out a fakie rock as well, managed to just about get away with it, but that axle being half an inch back changed the amount of purchase my front foot could achieve, so I found I just needed to relax on the pressure on the nose just to bring those back wheels in. Next up, it was time to get up on that coping and do some grinds. With a bit of practice, these trucks grind really nicely. They've got a different feel to the Indies, and they also sound different. They're a little bit more high pitch when you rattle across that coping. The Indies have a sort of deeper growl to them. The axle on the C5 trucks is a little bit thinner, and that makes it more pointy than the independent trucks. So as I went round, I found that if my foot pressures were a little bit off, it was possible for that front truck just to dig in to the coping, and got bucked straight over the front, and that was pretty emotional. So to counteract this, I just made sure I went really fast and also stayed a little bit more in the back seat, so a little bit more pressure on that back foot, try not to be so front foot heavy, and I managed to get the grinds to travel round and not dig in. Another thing I had to adjust for was the amount of spring I got off of my pump up onto the coping. Now the bushings on the C5 trucks are quite thick and they're super springy, so I was finding that my normal pump up onto the coping was sending me straight out the top. So I just had to relax that pump down a bit. As soon as I got the feel, I was back in the game. I found that tight carving radius really helped get up on the coping, especially for things like the rolling grind, where I could do a little carve just before I approached the coping, and that sort of sent me straight on top, and I locked in pretty much every attempt. I also needed to make a slight adjustment to the way that I locked in to my 50-50 grinds. That front truck's a bit more wobbly, so again I just needed to be a little bit more sensitive on that front foot, make sure that the lock-in was achieved, but I wasn't really leaning loads on that front foot, otherwise it could catch and I'll be off the front. As my confidence grew, I thought I'd chance my arm with a board slide to fakie, and oh my goodness, getting into the board slide was a treat. Again, I think the way the SurfSkate turns just spat me up on top for the board slide. But I'm not going to lie to you, coming back in fakie at a rate of knots is not the strong point of these trucks. I came a cropper a few times and I had to call it a day with the board slide to fakie. I found these trucks worked really nicely for those basic sort of coping tricks. They felt pretty much the same as Indy trucks for the front side axle stall. And for the backside axle stall, I found I just needed to be a little bit more in the back seat and not push so hard on that wobbly front truck. If I did that, the board just locked in really nicely and riding away was absolutely no problem. Well, that's it for this video on the Winkowski SurfSkate experiment, and I have to say, I really enjoyed it. That carving feel is the main plus point. Just carving around the pool felt so good. Trying to get those turns really nice and tight, pumping out of them and trying to channel my inner surfer. I think the main consideration here is the compromise between carving performance and being able to go backwards. If you really like going backwards and you're not so fussed about doing tight turns, then I would say just normal trucks are probably the way to go. If you're in the mood for some surfy and also you don't mind a bit of a challenge for riding backwards, or you don't do too much riding backwards at all, then I reckon the C5 SurfSkate trucks are a really good choice and they are a lot of fun. I'm going to take a little bit of time running both setups. I'm going to take them both to the park, and depending on what mood I'm in, I'll ride whichever one suits that mood. For a final mission, I wanted to try out these trucks on a slightly longer wheelbase deck. I found that this longer deck with a more generous wheelbase afforded me a stance that was more like the one I'd use on a surfboard, a little bit wider, allowed me to bend my knees a little bit lower. So just cruising around the bowl, doing frontside turns, felt really comfortable. This more surfy stance and feel inspired me to revisit one of my favourite surf-inspired skateboard manoeuvres, the Burt Slide. I found the surf trucks worked really well for the Burt Slide. The biggest difference was the way that I could set up a pre-carve quite tight, and that allowed me to send the back wheels out really aggressively. Trying those front side, I was remembering my key points of bending my knees, pumping up the transition. As I planted my hand to look with my head, that really sends the back legs out, look straight back down the transition, and then as the feet start to come to the top of the turn, pull hard on the front hand, which allows you to maintain your motion as you go around that turn. Also wanted to see how they would deal with a revert, so I did my front side Burt Slide right the way around 360, coming out fakie, and found that this worked a treat. Could really spin it round, and then riding backwards I'd already had a bit of a go with, but with the extra long wheelbase it rode backwards even more smoothly. I tried a few backside Burt Slides as well, coming right out the top. I don't like the look of those as much as the front side, so I don't practice those as much, but it was nice to get a few on the surfy setup.
So here we are, and oh my goodness, looking pretty 70s. As with a lot of 70s skate parks, there is no coping. You can just roll over the edge. There looks to be a few modern features added, a little bit of a curb there. There's also quite an exciting looking parking curb style section there. The concrete is looking pretty vintage. It's been nicely kept up and repaired though. There are a few gaping holes, but I think my SurfSkate wheels will be able to cope with this. And there's another more modern looking feature, a bit of a tombstone style affair. Now my initial concern is all of these transitions are really mellow, so it's going to be quite hard to generate speed and maintain speed, but it looks pretty cruisy, rolling in, rolling over the top and back in. I can't wait to give it a go. I'm mildly terrified by how rough this concrete is, a bit like sandpaper, so probably don't want to come off. And yesterday I had my biggest slam of the year so far, knocked the old head, so I'm going to pop my helmet on, not going to take any chances. Crikey, that is more exciting than it looks. Probably looks pretty mellow in the video, but the big concern is coming a cropper, skinning the knees on this sandpaper concrete. It's also pretty rough, and there is a danger of going down a pothole and coming off, so that's always in the back of the mind. It really takes a lot of effort to pump those transitions, and the amount of effort required is probably more like surfing than skating, so the old thighs are burning. After a bit of practice, I managed to find a few lines where I could keep my speed, and I found it good practice to try and pump up back on the top of the transition and then ride along the top and then drop back in. Also, when I was doing my turns, I was trying to remember to swish my legs around, look with my body, and also use my arms, try and generate as much speed as possible, and also try and pump up the transitions as well as back down them. That deep end section is looking prime for a Burt slide, so I'm going to see if I can get enough speed to get a bit of a Burt slide. Crikey, that concrete is pretty rough, and I was starting to wear some holes in my hands, so I had to put my gloves on. It's also quite tricky to break the wheels out, and my enemy was a lack of speed. Really tricky to get enough speed into that deep end to execute a bit of a Burt slide, but after a few attempts, managed to get a couple to come back in. Well, that's it for my visit to Play and Place Skate Park. I found it a lot of fun. I'd recommend packing some soft wheels. If you've got a SurfSkate, pop that in the boot as well. Also a set of gloves if you're going to do anything involving touching that concrete. It is like sandpaper, and it's also worth loading in those carbohydrates and coming with a fresh set of legs.
Well, that's it for this video. I had loads of fun putting it together. Many thanks for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, remember to hit that subscribe button if you like this type of content. It just means you'll be notified when I make more videos, which is something I do all the time. As ever, my name's been John Bishop, and I'm a middle-aged guy learning to surf skate.